Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Today we have a great leader, the Chief Mandela, Nkosi Mandela, we have today in our program. He is a visionary leader and global chairperson. He is a visionary leader and champion of international solidarity and human rights. He champions the causes of voiceless and suffering masses of the world. He is a politician, traditional leader, community developer, activist, and entrepreneur, philanthropist. He straddles multiple roles yet stands firm by his traditional values and committed to building a better South Africa, a united Africa, and the world that is just peaceful, in which all can enjoy freedom, peace, and prosperity. As we know, he is heir to one of the three legacy institutions founded by father of South African democracy, President Nelson Mandela. Those legacy institutions are Royal House of Mandela, the Nelson Mandela Foundation, and Nelson Mandela Children's Fund. As the traditional leader of Royal House of Mandela and Traditional Council, and Nkosi Mandela, popularly called Chief Mandela, he is the royal lineage and successor to long line of Abathmu leaders and was selected by his grandfather and crowned in April 2007 as chief and heir of Mandela legacy. Here, this legacy and his profile is too long to read, in this kind of short interviews. So let us hear from him. Please, could you start the story, It will be interesting to our audience, our viewers, to hear from you.
Shukran and salam alaikum to everyone and the viewers that are listening on. My name is Nkosi Zwelivelile Mandela, or Chief Mandela of the Royal House of Mandela in the Mvezo Traditional Council. I'm also a member of Parliament, serving in the National Assembly in the Parliament of the Republic of South Africa. I am the chairperson of the Portfolio Committee on Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development. It is a great honor and a privilege to join you on this interview, and I want to thank my brother Abbas for having invited me to partake in this session. The Royal House of Mandela is committed to upholding the life and legacy of President Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela, and also to advancing the causes that he championed all over the world. Our work, therefore, has a global reach and is embraced by individuals and communities in the most remote villages and towns around the globe. Our engagements with communities is therefore motivated by the vision of a free, democratic, and just and prosperous South Africa, a united Africa, and a better world for all. Over the past 27 years of our democracy, we have made many gains as South Africans and successes in uplifting communities in South Africa, but we still have much to do to overcome the legacy of colonialism and apartheid. This is especially evident in the divide between urban and rural communities. Mvezo Komkhulu, or rather the Great Place as it is known, it is the birthplace of our global icon and is located in the Eastern Cape province of South Africa. It is home to about 25,000 people, and life has not changed much since my grandfather was born here in 105 years ago. I was coronated as the chief of Mvezo, a traditional council and the Royal House of Mandela in April 2007. and as a successor to a long line of the royal lineage in the presence of my grandfather, political leaders, traditional leaders, and leaders of the community. We have, as a community, strive to make Mvezo Komkhulu, or the Great Place, a model of rural development by developing a vision that encompasses all aspects of developing the community. Madiba, as popularly known, is ingrained in us the value of education and always reminded us that education is the most powerful weapon we can use to change the world. This has characterized the work that we do in the villages throughout rural South Africa. Ours is a belief that education is freedom, and it is only through education we can be able to alleviate poverty. We have also encouraged Madiba has also encouraged us by telling us that education is the great engine of personal development. It is through education that a daughter of a peasant can become a doctor, that a son of a mine worker can become a head of a mine, that a child of a farm worker can become the president of a great nation. We have, therefore, in focusing on education, built the Nolusapo Kindergarten in Madiba's birthplace with the assistance of Alimdad Foundation, which invested over 5 million rands in order to build a proper educational facility for preschool going kids from the age of 0 to 5 years old. And we have about 200 learners in this facility where we are able to cook daily food for them. We have also been able to build the Makhatule Wanika Mandela Primary School with the assistance of the Dr. Chung Foundation in Hong Kong, investing an amount of 30 million rands into the facility, where we have been able to build a very state-of-the-art school, catering for 600 learners. And all these learners, through our government nutritional program, they are able to get one decent meal while they are at school. And this helped us to culminate in the Mandela School of Science and Technology, which we were assisted with a global company from Germany, Siemens, who invested about 100 million rands into the school. This is one of the most beautiful state-of-the-art schools that I've ever witnessed and seen in the entire rural communities in the African continent. Because it's a specialized school in science and technology, it has drawn students from the broad space of our province and from other provinces from South Africa. We are now in dire need to build accommodation for students that are coming from afar. We are working tirelessly to raise about 145 million rands to build accommodation for learners. At least about 350 learners should be accommodated within the school premises. This will ensure the security of learners in and around our community. The need for the village next phases. For us, we want to ensure that our schools become schools of excellence And therefore, we would like to see, even in our primary school, that we are able to build teacher accommodation, because our teachers come from Mthatha, which is 80 kilometers away, and sometimes driving to the school leads to them arriving late and therefore impacting on the school's program. We have also embarked on expanding the agricultural potential of our village, where we have focused, because Mvezo, Madiba's birthplace, is located amongst one of the biggest rivers in the Eastern Cape province called Mbashe River. And we have about 380 hectares of arable land that is at our disposal. And therefore, we would like to utilize that in creating the much needed jobs for our community, to ensure that we can be able to have self-sustainable projects in our area. Most of our men are still subjected to being migrant laborers, and they leave our village to seek for work in mines as far as Rustenburg and Johannesburg. And therefore, for most part of the year, we are left with women-headed households. And therefore, through these agricultural projects, we want to empower women and young people in our area. We do have other self-sufficiency programs, such as sewing projects, to ensure that women in our community are able to sew dresses and skirts and school uniforms that they can be able to sell within the community. In restoring dignity of rural girls, as well as ensuring basic needs through effective partnership. We have looked to bring about sanitation programs. The Miss World organization, through the Miss World at the time, which was Manusi Chilla from India, they were able to donate a sanitary towel production machine with a value of about $50,000. And we have been able to utilize this machine to produce sanitary towels, disposal sanitary towels for young girls. And this is a project we would like to see grow, so that we can be able to employ as many women as we can, so that they can continue to resolving the plight that we see in rural South Africa. We have always been able to open ourselves into establishing formidable partnerships, and therefore we are seeking partners in all areas of development in Madiba's birthplace, including in building the Nelson Mandela Museum at Mvezo Great Place. In doing so, we were able in 2018, when we were celebrating Madiba's centenary, that we came with an official Mandela, the official exhibition. It was launched in London and has since been touring in London and in Berlin, in Germany. With the wake of the corona pandemic, we were able to close it down, but it has recently opened last year in April in Milwaukee, USA, and it's currently touring in USA. We were hopeful during the Dubai Expo that we would bring this Mandela official exhibition to the Expo and have it tour in Dubai and Abu Dhabi. But inshallah, we hope that this would happen in the near future and we can be able to see that. That is the brief under this short time I was given. I thought I should make that brief introduction of the work we do, and then we can open up for a discussion. Thank you.
Great, remarkable, it's wonderful that to hear the work you are doing and the legacy you are keeping. And we know, the world knows about this great leader, Nelson Mandela. we know the stories, the struggles he has been, and all those things are known to the world. So we would like to know this time, how was your personal experience with your grandfather? Because that exclusively we can hear only from you, Could you share with us?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I've told the story on many platforms, and it's a story I always enjoy telling. That my mother has always told me with my father that they introduced me to my grandfather as a small baby of 2 years old in Robben Island prison. But I was 2 months old and have no recollection of that. It will only be when I was 9 years old in 1983 that I came to meet my grandfather in Pollsmoor prison. But no one had actually taken me into confidence as to where I was going, who I was going to meet. And I think my father always found it very funny that every time I went out to the streets of Soweto in the township in protest, young people will always shout, Amandla. And then what would follow after that would be, Viva Mandela, Viva. And I always used to run home and tell my father, I'm very popular in the streets because everyone is shouting my name, but most profoundly, they also are shouting my surname in the streets. So my father thought, he had now the opportunity to take me on a trip of self-discovery and to really learn what the man behind the name was. And I was then taken with my aunt Zinzi. We drove a whole day to Brantford, where my step-grandmother, Mam Winnie, was banished to. And it was on that visit that I met Mam Winnie for the first time, where the following morning we had to get on a plane with her and fly to the Western Cape in Cape Town, where we were received by Dala Omar and his lovely wife, Farida Omar, who were the ones to take us to Pollsmoor prison. But arriving at Pollsmoor prison without knowing why we were there, I could clearly see every window had bars and every door had bars. And this, to a 9-year-old, clearly spelled out that we were in a prison. So I had many questions racing through my mind, and we were put in this waiting room with Mam Winnie. And suddenly I heard this voice of a man who appeared to be very inquisitive and was greeting, "Hello, Warden. How are you today? It has been a while since I saw you. How's your family?" And I thought, man, this man is inquisitive about people's lives and daily living. And then he went further to ask the warden, how's the legal matter that I assisted you with? And the warden kept answering. And suddenly this voice drew closer to the door, and a giant leaped into the room, and Mam Winnie became very emotional, and they were greeting for momentarily. And suddenly this giant of a figure turned around and looked at me and said, "You must be my grandson, Mandla." And I was taken by surprise and shock of a man in prison calling me his grandson. And I became very withdrawn because a prison for me was, as a child, a place where wrong people in society were sent to in terms of correctional services. And now I thought this man has disgraced our family. And our 45-minute visit felt like a long lifetime visit. But my grandfather could see what was going through my head and understood the challenges that I was put in during that visit. And he wrote a letter to a colleague and friend of his, Helen Joseph, that I've just had a visit from my grandson and an heir to the family chieftaincy. He seemed to be limited in his English. Please assist in developing him. And Helen Joseph received this letter and invited me to her house and asked me to read the letter and said, "What do you make of this letter?" And I felt a bit embarrassed. I said, "Well, my grandfather thinks I can't speak English and is asking you to assist in developing." So Helen Joseph laughs and says, "This is a remarkable letter because it's a first letter that we are receiving from Madiba, which has not been censored by the apartheid regime. Every letter that we have received before and after this has always had sentences that were blanked out or even cut out in totality. So you were reading part of a sentence or part of a paragraph. But this one has been sent in its entirety as it is. And your grandfather says you went to visit him and you had no knowledge of who he was and the ideals and principles that he represented and his commitment to our struggle for liberation. He has asked me to educate you about our struggle for liberation, which was very profound for me because I always saw and regarded white people to be supremacists and to be oppressors of our people. But here was a white woman who was fighting side by side with us for our own freedom and in our struggle for liberation. And these are the teachings of my grandfather that enlightened me to have a broader perception of our struggle for liberation, that it was a non-racial and non-sexist struggle to defeat colonialism and an oppressive, brutal apartheid regime that we were impressed on. And it would be over the years after meeting him at Paulsmoor Prison. I was afforded as a young child 45 minutes once a year to see him, but that then grew to being 2 visits a year. And I would always be appreciative of the times that I got to spend with my grandfather. Even when he was diagnosed with prostate cancer, I was able to visit him at Tygerberg Hospital in Cape Town and had the opportunity to exchange and learn from him through his experiences. And these were the memories that I would always treasure. But I would never forget the last visit we had as a family when we were all invited to Victor Verster prison. And it was the first time that we were all invited as a family to visit him. And we were all worried because we thought at that time that we were going to be told that Madiba was no more and he had passed on, only to find out on our visit that Madiba had prepared a luncheon and he wanted his family to have a lasting impression of the last place that he served his 27 years of incarceration for our fight to the struggle for our liberation. And to see him being released on the 11th of February in 1990 brought tears of joy to me. And I fled the school I was at in Swaziland and crossed the border to rush home so that I could be home when he arrived home as a free man. And I enjoyed the 3 days I had to spend with him at home. But that joy only ended in 3 days because on the Wednesday, when we met in the kitchen, he asked me, "Young man, aren't you supposed to be at school?" And I said, "No, Granddad, I've also come back home. Since you have returned as a free man, I've also come back home." And he said, "Nonsense, you must go back to school at once." And this was Madiba's commitment to education and ensuring that we got the best educators teaching us, because he wanted us to be instrumental in the transition of our country and also to play a role in the new political dispensation. So I'm very grateful that I was able to live under my grandfather's roof and learn firsthand from him in how he was able to champion our transition to being a democratically free society. And we will always treasure the memories, particularly as grandchildren, that we had from such a global icon.
Oh, these are very remarkable memories, because especially our viewers can hear the firsthand from you. So really thrilling experiences that we could hear from you. And when Mr. Mandela came back from the prison, he was good and harmonious to the people who tortured him even in the prison. So that's, the world knows that his tolerance and harmony to even his opponents and enemies. So do you have any personal such experiences to share, that because we have heard from the different peoples and different writings that we have earlier, so we'd like to listen from you any special such kind of experiences.
Well, I mean, my grandfather always used to tell the story, Dr. Abbas, that when it became evident that he would be released, he had to conquer one issue of leaving prison. He says that if he had left prison with all the hatred towards those that had sent him to prison for the beliefs and the ideals that he believed in, he would be a prisoner away from prison. And he chose to leave all of that in prison so that he could walk out as a free man and be able to lead our people into a new political dispensation. And again, there was a momentous task that laid ahead, because you had the oppressed and the oppressors who had to come together in order to build a new South Africa that gave equal rights for all. And therefore, it wasn't going to be a one-sided approach. It had to be both entities, as the oppressors and the oppressed, finding solutions jointly for the vast majority of our people. And this is why it was necessary for him, before he was released, to defeat the purposes of what they were sent to prison for. And he openly said, before our release and before any talks of negotiations could be realized, there were three key principles that had to be met by the oppressors. And that has been the release of all political prisoners and the unbanning of all political parties, as well as the right of return of all South Africans living in exile. And this has been the lessons that were instrumental in placing a foundation for formidable talks to be held in order for us to have negotiations and the transition to democracy. And in learning that from him, I have been able to utilize that as a means in the work we do as activists, fighting for human rights across the globe, where many oppressed nations fight for their own liberation. We continue in the likes of Palestine, for example, to calling on the apartheid regime of Israel to meet these three policies that Madiba championed, to call for the immediate release of all political prisoners, to also make a call for unbanning of all Palestinian political parties to be able to have participation in peace talks and negotiations, and to give right of return to all Palestinians living in the diaspora. There's over about 6 million Palestinian refugees that are living in exile. They must be given a right of return. These are therefore lessons learned from my grandfather that we hold dear to ourselves as young people in the family and in South Africa. And we share these lessons that we learned from my grandfather with many of our counterparts in the African continent, as well as in the global community. You would have learned that I went to participate in a conference in Dakar, where we had young people from 21 countries across the African continent coming together to give their support to the Palestinian cause. And this for us is really paramount, because as Africans, we have been subjected to colonialism and apartheid, where we have had to fight our oppressors in order to gain our liberation. And therefore, these are lessons that we have been able to learn from our forefathers. We are able to share with the global community.
Yeah, great. You know, even the legacy of your grandfather, the great leader, the father of the nation, you know, our viewers will be interesting on, they will be enthralled to hear maybe hours, you know, so that we have time limitation. Let us come from the legacy to the present life. So I would like to hear, you know, what's your personal life, you know, that you became Muslim, and how is the life, and how you interact with other communities, and as a chief, you know, chief of the Mandela now.
This has been a long journey for us. I think, firstly, I must appreciate my grandfather's role. You know, my grandfather grew up in the countryside as a young man who thought that the only religion in the world that existed was Christianity. And it was only in 1944, on his arrival in Johannesburg, that he came that there were more religions in the world which were as equally important as Christianity, if not more important. And it would be Maulvi Kachalia who actually educated my grandfather on the basic Islamic tenets of Islam. And Maulvi Kachalia was able to introduce my grandfather to Islam and bring him closer to many Muslims in and around the Fortsburg and Mayfair area of Johannesburg. And these became the most entrusted colleagues and friends to my grandfather, to the extent that when he would go into hiding from the apartheid regime, he would hide amongst Muslims in their Muslim homes. And he then came to even appreciating the cuisines and dishes from those communities. But years later, I then happened to go to school with Hussein Kachalia, who's the great nephew to Maulvi Kachalia, as early as 1993 on my return in South Africa. And it was Hussein Kachalia who began taking me into the journey of Islam. And I remember as early as 1995 that I began going to him to mosque and seeing and learning as much as I could about Islam. And I became appreciative of the religion. But when I was coronated in April 2007 as a chief, I then started working closely with Alimdad Foundation through another friend of ours with Hussein Kachalia, whose name is Mohammed Saluji. And the Salujis, through Alimdad Foundation, came to Madiba's birthplace and built, as I said earlier, the Nolusapo Kindergarten, investing 5 million rands into the facility. And the generosity of Muslims throughout South Africa and throughout the global community and their role in charity made me aware in terms of how conscious Muslims were, particularly in the period of Ramadan, to give to charity, to assist those that are most fortunate, to assist orphans. And I then began to undergo a process of learning as much as I could about Islam. And it was in 2015 that I was able to revert and embrace Islam through Mohammed Saluji and Hussein Kachalia. And I've always been forever grateful that I am now part of the Islamic and Muslim community in South Africa and the global community. And as a traditional leader, many people came to challenge that how can you as a traditional leader embrace Islam? And I say, but it's the same as a traditional leader that embraces Christianity. What gives superiority over one religion to the other? I live in a community that has many religions. There's African religion, there's Christianity, there's now Islam in my community. And for us, and the deen is to ensure that we grow the ummah and we ensure that we are able to teach Islam to as many people in rural South Africa as we can. And therefore, I've truly been grateful to embrace Islam and be able to further the work that I do with our Muslim brothers and sisters in South Africa.
That's wonderful. Let us sum up with this. Could you correlate maybe the activities and the sufferings of your grandfather, that the values of Islam, how you see these things together?
One of the greatest thing I think my grandfather embraced was to able to forgive his oppressors. And I think this is one thing that has humbled me personally in learning from my grandfather. One being forgiveness, and also that Madiba dedicated 67 years of his life serving humanity. This is why his birthday, July 18, was embraced by the United Nations and declared the International Nelson Mandela Day. And there's been a global calling on that day to dedicate 67 minutes of our time serving our communities. And these two elements of serving our communities as well as being forgiven are anchored and enshrined in our Islamic way of living. You cannot be able to live with hatred in you and not being having the ability of forgiving your brothers and sisters. We have families that have turned their backs of one another and they don't speak for months, years, and decades. And Islam teaches us that we should be able to forgive in order for us to be able to be forgiven by the Almighty Allah. And this also the ability of serving our communities and nation is enshrined within our Islamic values to be able to serve humanity. be able to care about the other being the next person. And this is the true values that I would say that my grandfather embraced with his wholeheartedly. And I found to be very much anchored within our Islamic religion.
Thank you so much. Actually, we cannot stop listening to you, because really inspiring, and our viewers also won't allow me to stop this, but we have some time constraint. Hope we will have more chances to hear you in person in Abu Dhabi this next month, because we have a conference. You are coming here to deliver your lecture directly to our audience. So our people will be maybe much looking forward to listening you here and receiving you here in Abu Dhabi. So thank you so much for joining us, especially sharing wonderful and unique experiences that related to the great leader of the world and also the coming, maybe the future leader of the world. Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.